And I think if, yeah, so I think if things had progressed ideally, like according my ideals, but I am her mom, so I have very high expectations, um, then we probably wouldn't struggle as much to communicate with her, and we wouldn't have put her in preschool so late, and we wouldn't have done this or that, and she hasn't even received some of the services that she should be receiving at this point. So that's always been the most frustrating, is just trying to get through to people because there's such a discrepancy there. It really is.
Thank you, Audra. I think we all share in that experience as well, for sure. So our next question is, in any aspect of the systems and services that you all engage in for either yourself or for your child, what questions do you wish providers would ask you? So, Audra, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think I wish providers I wish providers would put down their prescription paper long enough to look at us and ask, what do you think is best for your child? Because I think in a lot of cases, and this is completely true, this is their job, they the faith the parents' faith is put in their hands because they are the professionals. They went to medical school. We didn't, unless you happen to be that parent that went to medical school. But um so we trust these doctors. We're putting our kids' health in their hands, and or nurse practitioners or whatever. And but I think that they get so blindsided with just trying to let's wrap up this patient, move on to the next, that they forget like these are families who are just trying to make a better life for their kids. So I wish that people would ask me more often, like, what do you think your child needs? What do you think? You're the mom, you know your child. And sometimes I wish that doctors or providers would ask, like, hey, are you okay? Because whether or not I tell them the truth is a different thing, but just showing that compassion is enough. Because doctors' offices are already in like a cold, frigid environment. You know, no one feels completely at ease there, and people are nervous. But if that doctor showed compassion for what the parent is feeling, because the parent is the one undertaking all the responsibility, that would make a world of difference.
Thank you for that. Edie, would you like to go?
Yeah, I feel the same way Audra feels. If they would ask, "Are you okay?" And also, I just want to piggyback on what else she said. If they stop and ask, "Have I answered your questions today? Have I listened to you today?" And not wait until we take the survey. Find out right then and there if you've done what we as parents feel like you should have done or needed to do. Are the parents the best at knowing what's best for their child? I think so too. So if they ask us, "Are you okay? What else do you need?" I think that would help.
Thank you. Michelle?
Well, I think they nailed it. I think a lot of us are just asking to be seen also through this process. And for a long time, it was something I struggled with. How do I explain what the experience is like to raise a child with a disability? But actually, with this pandemic, you all have kind of experienced a little bit of that, right? You've all felt what it's like to be isolated. You've all felt what it's like to not be able to go to sporting events. You've all felt what it's like to not be able to have your kids do sporting events. You've all kind of felt very little of what it's like to live a day in our lives, a year in our lives. And we do it for year after year after year. And so I'm hoping that through this pandemic, you guys can feel a little bit of how we feel and use that empathy to really relate to us and to what we go through and what our experiences are, and really ask those questions. How are you doing? Is there anything we can help you with? Are there resources we can connect you with? because resiliency, a lot of resiliency is about resources, right? Making sure that we know where to go if we need help, if we have a problem. And yeah, I think just kind of that connection with the parent and realizing that if we as parents, if we're not okay, our kids are not okay. And so you really have to be mindful of how you're talking and interacting with the parent and what our experience is like and how you can help us through that experience too, because helping us eventually helps the child, right? Like we are connected, we're one. And so I think really that look at the whole family and not just the child with a disability is a huge thing that's missing right now. And I'm loving that we're here and we're talking about it, because I hope that it's something that bridges and is something that's wonderful that comes out of this discussion.
Thank you. Yes, it kind of goes back to that when we talk about family-centered or person-centered, right? We have to think about holistic rather than just the individual issue present. This is great. I did forget to kind of mention if you're all thinking of questions you'd like to ask or you know, any additional thoughts to share, please feel free to put in the chat. We do have some time at the end for that. So just wanted to throw that out there for all of you as you're listening. So Michelle, you touched on the pandemic and kind of the effects, and that has obviously shifted so many different areas of, especially in maternal children's health and programs and that. But at the end of the day, we still have our very complicated world. So thinking in addition to the pandemic and even beyond the pandemic as we look forward, you know, what emerging needs for individuals and families of children with special health care needs do you see as something to focus on? You know, what could be ideas for enhanced programs or, you know, new projects, new grants, things to that nature?
Did you want me to take that one? Okay. I think that, you know, creating programs that help to enhance the parents' protective factors is a huge thing that would be great. There is a whole program called Protective Factors Training Framework, and it's usually given in the welfare system. So the welfare system uses this, but it would be great to use it as a preventative, right? So how do you prevent things from happening within families? By strengthening them, by building up the protective factors before an incident happened would be great. I also think that preparing more college students to enter into the world of early intervention would be absolutely amazing. And there's a huge need within the disability community for respite providers, for HAB providers. And I think that there is a huge need within the university system to get more students hands-on experience in the home, in clinics. And I think that those two needs match up really well. And I would love for universities to be able to partner with our community and say, hey, you know what, we're going to be able to provide students who are actually on this path to do HAB and respite and work with families and fill a huge need within our community, and hopefully get more students engaged and interested in working with the younger population. Because if you really want to see and have an impact on outcomes for children, it's in the early intervention system. And so I would love to see us work in that direction.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Edie, how about you?
Yes, I feel, I agree with what Michelle said, getting to people early in college, even in high school. I think that along with early intervention and other areas like that, if we get information out to our teens and our college students or young adults in every aspect, in every field, to reach them no matter where they're going to go, what they want to do, I think that would also be great. I also feel like, I know I talk about sickle cell a lot because that's our main focus, but if we have programs for our teens in sickle cell to keep them updated if they have trait or disease and keep others updated, I'm noticing that we need more doctors who are more informed about blood types. Not that they need to know everything, but just have enough information about a person's blood type to say, okay, let's look at all of this. Let's see what's going on. Is that what's affecting you over here? You know, they may have some disease or some issue going on, and their blood may actually be affecting them. And we don't know because all these other symptoms point to something else. So that's, I feel like if we start early, we can combat that.
Thank you, Edie. Audra, how about you?
Yeah, hold on. Let me just. Sorry, people have been in and out of this room the whole time Edie was talking. I was like, please go away.
Thank you for multitasking today.
So I think honestly, sorry. I think there should be more groups focused on helping parents learn to deal with the stress of what it's like to have a child who has a disability, because disability in itself is a spectrum, you know, because not only there are multiple types, but there's multiple types of those multiple types. And it's so stressful, and it really takes a toll on a parent's mental and physical well-being. And I really, really wish there was more support for that, especially in Arizona, because we don't really have that. And if we do have that, you have to really know a lot of people who happen to know this group, you know, who can be like, hey, there's this thing, and you're gonna be like, I've never heard of this thing before in my life. And so I really wish there were more support groups for that. And I wish that I wish, I don't know, I guess there's a lot of things I wish, you know. I don't know as far as like grants or funding or whatever, but I guess I had lost my train of thought.
That's okay. If you get it back, let us know.
Oh, I do. I think I have one more thing. Just give me a second to like draw it out. I wish that even with the pandemic, and this is gonna sound really bad, but with the pandemic, people are staying home more, and that's put some kids in some very unfortunate situations. I wish providers of all kinds had more training on how to recognize abuse going on at home. And I'm not saying this from a personal experience. I'm saying this because working at a school for children who have disabilities, we see this all the time. And the doctors either don't have the training to really recognize it, or they don't have the resources to do anything about it, aside from just calling the Department of Child Safety. And what are they going to do? They're going to take everything into their own hands, and they don't handle every case that comes through their caseload. So yeah, I wish we had like more resources on how to handle those situations, and just even being able to recognize when the child is in that situation, especially if that child has limited to no communication skills. And you know, and that's often the case for children who can't speak or have limited speech skills, and they don't know how to vocalize that they're in that situation. So I do wish we had more awareness of that, and I think if we did, we would be saving a lot of kids going forth. But all right, I'm done.
Thank you, Audra. That's a really important point. And I think, you know, to what was said in the pandemic, it, you know, a lot of us felt that isolation. And then, you know, a lot of our families, in addition, lost supports that we had, and that can add stress, and that can add even beyond what families like ours have in an everyday normal circumstance, non-pandemic. So those are very, very, very important points. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in the spirit of engaging our families and our communities, I mean, I think the three of you today have just demonstrated such an amazing wealth of knowledge and experience that I'm hoping is helping those in our audience to see things from that perspective. Where we need to do better and work more collectively is ensuring that this experience and this voice gets into these programs early so that we can continue to benefit and improve and ensure that they're really doing what it's intended to do and that those outcomes really are happening. What do you wish providers could or would do to build projects that are more inclusive of that experience and that voice? Edie?
Okay. I feel as if they have a parent at the table. That would help. Someone from whatever area they're working in or adjacent to work in. Because honestly, everything connects in some way. And I think that would be a great help.
Audra, what do you think?
Just like repeat the question one more time, so I kind of like, you're muted.
Thank you. I knew I was going to do that once today. How do you feel providers that you work with could build into their programs a better way to include your voice and your feedback and your experience to help that program work better?
I think what Edie said is pretty much it. Having a parent voice at the table, having a non-medical parent voice at the table, I should say. Somebody who knows their kids, or at least knows the community that they're being affiliated with and can say something. I think that would do a lot. But I think it also depends on the provider. So my daughter's audiologist is amazing. You know, I don't have a single problem with her, but her audiologist was my audiologist when I was growing up. But then you have like we're trying to get her, you know, services, and we're seeing this provider and that provider, and that just kind of falls through. And I just think I think having that parent voice at the table is what will help to really push that. So yes, I totally agree with Edie.
Thank you. Michelle?
I don't know that I have much to add. I think that, you know, nothing about us without us should also, you know, relate to the parents and having parent voice at the table and having us there to give our opinion, but also really listening to what we're saying. I've had lots of people come and, you know, be therapists for my children who will ask what my goals are, what my wishes are, and then they're like, okay, and then we're going to write this program and it has nothing to do with anything that you just told me. So it's really great to ask, but then you also have to implement, right, what we're trying to get across. Because if you're asking and then you're just kind of doing your typical thing, then there's really no point. And now you've made us probably matter because you've asked for our opinion and yet you've not considered it or applied it. So I think that that's really an important, you know, step to asking and making sure we're at the table.
I'd like to add something, if that's okay. I just kind of thought of it. Maybe I kind of think that more providers could look into something that's called person-centered practices. And it's something that I do at work and is applicable to all areas of public service or whatever. And it's basically like, in this case, the child who has a disability and the parents, the family, whatever, would be sat down together and they would come up with a plan, whether that's long-term or short-term. And you would stick with that plan, and there would ideally there would be someone neutral in the situation to kind of mediate everything, to make sure everyone's voices are being heard, including the child's if they're at that stage, you know, where they can be heard. And it's and you know, I don't know, it's just a goofy idea I guess I had, but I think it's really a good way for the family to say, okay, this is what we want, this is what we need, and this is what we need your support in. And then the provider would say, this is what I can do for you, but I also need this. And you would just kind of have something there, written on paper or whatever, something set in stone to help implement that.
Thank you, Audra. Yes, I think, when through my experience, and you all may share this too, early on when your child's young and is diagnosed, it's always focused on what's wrong. And we're often not given the chance to think about goals and think about what's ahead and think about the opportunities that could still be there. It's more about sometimes fixing rather than supporting. And so I think, we talk about in MCH the life course. And so I think it's always important to be thinking about that yes, there may be something that we have to address and a concern, but how do we support that? And how do we support the family thinking and envisioning about what those goals could look like for themselves or for this child and this individual as they go through that life course? So great feedback. Thank you so much. So our last question is kind of about the resiliency aspect. And I think sometimes in the parents and families in our special health care needs world, think of resiliency different, or maybe we just don't think of it. We just do it because we just have to. Like, what other option do we have? And so we'd like to think about, how do you assess resiliency? And how do you all feel about talking about your resiliency? What does that look like to you? How do you think about resiliency in your day-to-day? And are you comfortable describing that so that, how do we even begin to assess what a family's resiliency looks like? Michelle, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So how I think of resiliency is not just the ability of the parent to bounce back from something difficult, but also the ability for them to be transformed by something that's difficult, to work their way through it, and to come out on the other side stronger and more resilient. And, I think that just touching base with the parents and making sure that they have support systems would be huge. Asking parents, if this happens, do you know who to call? Do you have somebody to call? And even showing parents that they are resilient. I think once we get into this world of having a child with a disability, we forget how resilient we are. I came from a background of being a geneticist. Like, I've been published in peer-reviewed journal articles. And when my children were diagnosed with autism, it was such a hard blow to everything that I thought that I knew and how to handle things, that I forgot that I was resilient and that I had these things within me, but I needed to be reminded of them. How do I tackle these problems? How do I go after these issues? And once I started figuring out that I knew what the answers were and I could pull that from within myself, it's not external, it's internal. And I think that when we work on that, that's really when you build resiliency within parents, right? You're not just giving them the answers, you're having them reach within themselves to find out that they know what the answer is and they know how to find that answer, and that it's always within themselves to do it. And I think that that's really important.
I agree. Thank you, Michelle. Audra, how about you? How do you think about resiliency in your world?
So when I think of resiliency, I think of this lesson I teach to one of my jobs, and it's called the super egg and the bouncy ball. So you throw an egg at the ball at the same time, and the egg's gonna crack, right? Because it couldn't handle the pressure, but the ball is gonna bounce back up. That's how we teach them what resiliency is. The resiliency is the ball that could handle the pressure of the ground and it bounced back up, And so that's what I think of mainly when I think of resiliency. I think it's just like a really good metaphor. And I think so that I think of resiliency as being able to just constantly hit rock bottom, but like come back up. And I feel like, Michelle said it, like we forget how resilient we are as parents because we're so focused on taking care of our kids, and we forget to take care of ourselves when we do that in the process. And you can tell based on like how tired we look or how stressed we seem to be, and how much of an impact that makes on us over time. And I totally forgot the second half of the question. I'm sorry, it's way too early in the morning for this.
That's okay.
You know, so could you just repeat the question one more time so I can make sure?
How do you think we could assess resiliency? Like, how could providers better or researchers better assess resiliency to demonstrate why it's important and why that has to be a component in the work that we do with our families?
So I think it's really, I honestly think it would be really great if my daughter's providers could kind of figure out how to tell when a parent is like on the last straw, like sometimes it gets to that point. And just having that support, having the basic words of compassion, would probably do a lot. Some people don't have a support system. They're trying to take care of their child. They don't have a support system. They're doing it on their own. If it weren't for my fiance and her mom, I wouldn't have a support system. Not really. I wouldn't have that family to help me. So it's just like being mindful that I say, we all come from different backgrounds and different walks of life. We don't have the same, none of us in this room have the same experience. And it's really important to remember that. And that also affects how we're going to tackle on parenting when it comes to children who have disabilities. And considering my daughter has the same disability I do, it makes it so much more personal because I knew it was going to happen. Like I knew if I have a child, there's a better chance she's going to have a hearing disability than not. So, but when they told me, yes, your child is losing your hearing in both ears, I was crushed because I felt like it was my fault. Of course, part of me still thinks it's my fault, but I have people tell me it was not your fault. That's just the way it is. So, I think it's also really, important for parents to remember, like, none of this is your fault. Don't feel guilt. Don't be so hard on yourself. As long as you're doing your best to provide to your child what they need, then you are being the best parent that they could have.
Well said, Audra. Thank you. Edie.
Yes, I completely agree with what Audra just said and with what Michelle said earlier. And also, you asked how can a provider assess a parent being resilient? I'm not real sure, but I like Audra's metaphor with the bounce back. So how do we bounce back? I'm not sure how to ask that or answer that. I just know from me and my experience, when you're in hospital due to a pain crisis and that lasts for a whole week or more, how do you come back from that? You just have to, because you're their parent, like Audra said. So I guess that's something to think about, is how to assess.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, right? And I think the thing to remember in our journey is it is a journey. It's a long journey, and there's ups and downs, and there's times when we're going to be super resilient and we're going to manage things really well, and then there's going to be times that we really hit those bumps in the road and struggle. And And, you know, kind of to what Michelle said, like nothing about us without us. It's also important to remember to meet the families and the individuals where they're at that time too. Just like disability is not a one size fits all, an individual's resilience is not a one size fits all. And so I sometimes struggle when asked that question about, you know, well, we want to do research and we want to measure what, you know, how can this program enhance the resiliency, or how can we better, you know, help families prepare and be resilient, and that can be a challenge. So I think all of these things you're hearing are important to keep in mind if you're thinking about how do we work to measure that. So thank you all for those great great responses. So we have a little bit of time, and I thought it would be really great to open it up if our attendees have any questions or comments or thoughts for our panelists, or if you'd like to, you know, chat them. I'm kind of looking through the chat, and there's a lot of great supportive and encouraging, great ideas for all of you and your responses. So thank you all for that. I did see there was a couple recommendations of some resources in there, and yes, absolutely, those are great options and trainings out there for both our community as families as well as providers. So does anyone have any questions or comments for our amazing group today?
There was a question from Rizwana who asked, what are valuable resources that would be helpful to support caretaker stress, including technology?
If it's okay, I'll take that one. So I have actually for the last 3 years been building a organization and a charity that focuses just on this, on caregiver resources and on reducing stress for parents who are raising children with disabilities. And so I'll put the website in there, but basically what we do is we provide tools for parents, webinars, educational webinars. We have guided meditations on there for parents. We also do have fitness programs because let me tell you, trying to get to a gym with a special needs child is something that just is not a reality for many of us. And so there what we're trying to do is to fill this gap and fill this need that parents have. We're also developing programs for parents to help to deal with the blow of, you know, having a child with a disability and how you recover it and be resilient through that. And so we have a lot of things kind of coming up, and anybody who has any ideas and wants to participate and help build this, Audra and Edie, I'd love to have you guys even just like come and look at it. What's missing? What do we still need? Because this is a huge passion for me, because I know if we're not okay, our kids are not okay. And that's what we want at the end of the day, is to have a whole healthy family, not just healthy kids, but we need to have healthy parents too.
I have a question building on something you were talking about earlier, just that, you know, that providers really need to have that parent input. I know a lot of organizations have like a parent panel or a patient, you know, advisory board or something like that. But I wonder how effective that structure really is, and if there's a different way that might be more effective. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure, yeah. And I know my mic is bad, so definitely tell me if you can't hear me. But I was just wondering, you know, if there's a more effective way than, you know, just have it like an organization has a parent advisory board or a patient advisory board. How, you know, like that's a good first start, but I don't know how effective that's been kind of for the day-to-day experiences of patients and parents. So I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts about ways to make that more effective. for families to be able to give feedback to providers or to help them understand the family point of view better?
It's a good question, but you do have a point. Like advisory boards and stuff are not that effective because typical bylaws state that they only have to meet 4 times a year, and that's not enough. So I think ideally to me, there would be some sort of role in these providers, organizations, a non-medical role who would just represent the families, you know. That would be ideally. Obviously, that's not always going to happen, and I'm honestly not going to hold my breath either. But I think just maybe if the organizations or providers practices or whatever were able to instill some type of even just a piece of paper asking how was your experience today. And I'm not talking about those boring surveys they send you after the appointment. No, I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about something personal with somebody that will actually pay attention to them and take everything into account and say, and then compile all that information and say something, you know. But again, that isn't an ideal world. That's not always going to happen, but that's how I think it would be more effective if we were able to actually implement that.
Yeah, I just want to second what she said, because I think when you have these parent panels, it's often parents who have like older children, and we've kind of gotten through a lot of the hard, heavy stuff, right? That's hitting us right in the beginning. And sometimes we can be far removed in terms of years of what is going on at that level. So to Audra's point, to get the real-time feedback and even sending that up to the different panels and committees would be a huge improvement. I sit on a lot of stuff for Arizona Early Intervention, but my son hasn't been in that program for 5 or 6 years. So is my experience really relatable to what is happening now? Probably not, because the systems have changed. So I don't have a really good perspective on what parents are currently going through. It's a really good point, Audra.
Edie, do you have any thoughts about that?
Sorry, can you repeat one more time your question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just wondering, you know, given that it seems to be, there's pretty much agreement that the panels, you know, that like patient or parent panels or boards, you know, haven't really led to a whole lot of change in the way that providers support patients and families. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about what would be more effective to kind of make them, to help them be more supportive.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer right now. I would have to think on that.
I sort of have a follow-up. I was thinking along the same lines, Katie, and I was wondering what sort of conditions would be helpful to engage parents so that they can be honest with their feedback. And then also I was just thinking about everything that parents have on their plate. What sort of things would you recommend to make it easier for parents to, you know, perhaps in the planning phases of programs and interventions, be engaged in that process?
I'm sorry, my coworker was talking to me. Could you repeat the second half of that question? Because that's the part where he was talking over you.
If I can remember. I think I asked, you know, in the process of planning programs, what are sort of the conditions that are needed to engage families, given that everything that you already have on your plate?
The conditions to engage families?
Yeah. So, I mean, Donna and I have had some brief
no, I understand. I
about
just wanted to make sure I heard you.
Yeah.
I think like, I would just want to not be, I don't want to feel like I don't have a voice in the room. I don't want to feel like there's all these people that have superiority or seniority or whatever over me. I don't want to feel like I'm going to be walked all over. And especially if this is concerning like my child or a situation where there are multiple children who have the same or similar disability to my child. and I want to feel welcome. I want it to be open and engaged. I want people to be actively listening, not just listening. And I really think that active listening is probably a key component in a lot of this, because active listening is way different than just regular listening. And and I think that will help. That would help me feel more open to being engaged in the situation. And if I'm in a position where I feel like I can be the blunt and honest person I am and interrupt someone and when something doesn't sound right, then I know I'm in a situation where I will feel comfortable enough to do this for my child. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I think Audra makes a great point. So, and to answer the question earlier from Katie, Michelle made a great point as well. And that's really all I gotta say. They make great points, so I don't have anything to add.
I would just add, in my work in trying to build better family engagement in MCH, and even in the MCHB realm federally, and the work that AmChip does, really recognizing this lived experience is valued professionalism. I mean, it really is. And thinking about, like, they talk about workforce development, and Audra had a really good point in, when we're asked to come to the table, we don't want to be there and feel like we're a checked box, or that we're the non-professional, we're just the parent or the youth or the individual. We're there honestly in the professional capacity of living this life, using these services. I mean, if anyone around the table has more insight, there really isn't anyone that has more insight and knowledge of the complexity and the complete aspect of whatever program or process that you may be discussing in that moment than the person or the individual or the family that's actually using it. And so I think shifting that mindset of, we're going to develop all of this and we're going to implement it, and then we're going to just say, what do you think? It's, here's our thought, here's what we want to do. How would this really look? Like, if you had to use this, would this be beneficial? Is this attainable? I think oftentimes processes and programs are developed and it's an added on top of an already full list of things that families have to do. And so we also have to be mindful of, could you even do this? Like, can you even navigate this or access this? And that's where really going back to intentionally engaging that perspective in the concept, and then the design, and then the implementation, and also in the assessment. I think our panel really talked too about surveys, right? We hate those surveys because they really ask questions in a way that you want the answers to be, not really what we want to share with you about our experience. And so I think being really intentional and engaging that of, what do you want to assess? And then how can we give you that? What does the questions need to be to help us share that feedback with you, to then continue to improve and enhance? So I think those are good questions, and thank you for asking them, because I think that there's a lot of room we can all come together and work better on that meaningful engagement and feedback. And I would also add to Meg's question about conditions, one benefit of the pandemic is the virtual, and that is a huge benefit for the disability community, for individuals as well as families, to make meetings and things accessible so that we can attend. And then also just be mindful that not every time can we be available during normal business hours. So if you are really wanting to engage, be open and creative about outside of that, because sometimes our families work too, in addition to having our children, or, like poor Audra's multitasking at work this morning. So, I mean, just really being intentional and thinking about what can those conditions look like to be inclusive and accessible for those that you're really wanting to engage with.
Well, thank you so much to this panel. I mean, I think you provided such critical insights for us to make this work even more intentional. We really appreciate your time. There are a couple more questions in the chat. So as we're moving on to our next session, if you are able to stick around and perhaps address those, that would be really great.